So once again, welcome to this masterclass. It is my pleasure now to leave the floor to Professor Lee. Professor, thank you so much for being here with us today.
My pleasure. Yeah, thank you for having me and thank you for the kind introduction. So hi, my name is Q Lee. I'm a marketing professor at Syracuse University. And at Syracuse University, I teach strategic brand management. And brand management is the topic that I'm very passionate about. I always am fascinated by this topic. So today, just with this short lecture, I will tell you about why brands and brand management are so significant in today's business world. What are some of the important contemporary trends in brand management, and what the implications of all these things are in terms of actually branding yourself, your personal branding. So let's get going then. Now, let's take the clock back by 24 years and let's go back to the year 1998. Okay. Now, in 1998, the business of a well-known British luxury cars, I'm talking about Rolls-Royce and Bentley cars, the business was in financial trouble. So the business was up for sale, and two well-known German car manufacturers, BMW and Volkswagen, you see those logos. These companies were highly interested in purchasing the Rolls-Royce and Bentley car manufacturing business. There was a competitive bidding. Both companies really wanted to win the bid, but eventually it was Volkswagen that won the competitive bidding by paying more than $700 million US. So all the parts, design, production facility, all the technology, the human talent, headquarters, everything became the possession of Volkswagen. Now, what was interesting about this transaction was, although the business was sold to Volkswagen and BMW lost the bidding, the brand name Rolls-Royce was not sold to Volkswagen because the brand name Rolls-Royce was actually the possession of the parent company Rolls-Royce PLC, which is also one of the world's leading manufacturers of jet engines, airplane engines. So the brand name still belonged to the Rolls-Royce PLC, and only the automobile manufacturing part, that business and all the tangible assets, all the designs and technology were sold to Volkswagen. As soon as BMW found this out, what did they do? They paid $60 million, a little bit over $60 million US, to buy the rights to use the name Rolls-Royce in automobile business. So now this is a really interesting situation because the name Rolls-Royce belongs to BMW now because of this transaction, but everything else belongs to Volkswagen. Now, from BMW's point of view, you can raise the question of whether it was worth spending that much money to buy the name, because by buying the Rolls-Royce name, what did they get? They didn't get anything tangible. They didn't get even a single tire or a handful of nuts and bolts, nothing, just the brand name. Was it really worth $60 million? One can ask that question. Well, what made the story even more interesting was if BMW invested that much money into the name, at least that they should have tried to make something out of it, but instead they allowed Volkswagen to use the name free of charge for 4 years, so that now from that time on, 1998, for the next 4 years until the end of 2002, Volkswagen produced Rolls-Royce cars, and they could freely use the Rolls-Royce logo and the name on the cars, the luxury cars that they were producing, because BMW just licensed the name free of charge to Volkswagen. Why would they do that? That's interesting. Now, if you just hear the story up to this point, it sounds like Volkswagen was the clear winner because they got all the technology, all the designs, all the tangible assets, and they were producing the Rolls-Royce cars, and they had no problem using the Rolls-Royce name by the generosity of BMW. But by the end of 2002, that agreement expired, and from that time on, who began producing Rolls-Royce cars? BMW. And BMW was the only company in the world who could produce Rolls-Royce cars because they had the rights to the name. They owned the name Rolls-Royce. In other words, if you think about this whole transaction of all the tangible assets, technology, design, and the brand name, I think this story really tells you that at the core, at the essence of this business transaction was not manufacturing or production or any particular technology, but it was the brand. And because of that, although BMW invested only $60 million, they got the core of the business. And in the long run, BMW got the Rolls-Royce business. It was not Volkswagen. Interesting. And because of the New York Times that carried the story about this transaction in 1998, really characterized the Volkswagen's failure to get the brand name as an embarrassing misjudgment in the business dealing. Very interesting. Now, that was 1998. That's when people were wondering, well, so it's a nice story and it shows the importance of brands or brand management, but was it really worth $60 million? Still, that question remained. Well, 1998, that was a legitimate question. If you come to nowadays, year 2022, people are not raising that question because now people really appreciate the huge, immense value of brands in today's business environment. Just look at this table. Probably one of the most famous rankings of the most valuable leading global brands is annually published by this research company Interbrand. And the most recent ranking, published almost a year ago in the fall of 2021, shows that Apple was the most valuable brand in the world. And what was the monetary value of this brand? $400 billion. Over $400 billion. Number two, Amazon. Still almost $250 billion. Microsoft, Google, followed by Samsung. The most valuable automobile brand was Toyota, ranked at number 7, and the valuation was over $50 billion. So if you think about these figures, and if you compare that to the $60 million that BMW paid in 1998, you can almost feel like it was a bargain. Because these days, the appreciation of brand value is much, much higher. Brands are huge, and most people agree that these numbers are not a gross exaggeration, but they really represent the real value of brands in today's business world. Now, this is interesting because then if the Apple, I'm not talking about the value of the company, if the value of the Apple brand is worth $400 billion, and Apple, the market capitalization as of today is probably about $2.3, $2.4 trillion. About 1/6 of the whole company's value is in the brand. Said differently, if this company Apple loses its exclusive rights to use this logo and this name in business, and if somehow the name Apple or the logo becomes just the general symbol that anybody can use, then at that moment, without losing any technology, any products, or any business connections, or any human capital, at that moment, Apple is losing $400 billion. Brands are huge. Well, brands may be huge, but how did this company come up with this particular specific dollar values? Well, that was the question of one of the bloggers, writers for Forbes magazine. So in 2017, about 5 years ago, that blogger actually contacted me and had a really interesting discussion. So if you're interested, actually, you can find this, click this link and then read a little bit more about it. But how do you actually measure something as intangible as a brand in dollar terms? And that is not easy. And because of that, nobody really agrees exactly to the last dollar or in cents how much each brand should be evaluated at. So it's a very difficult thing, but at least there is a clear agreement that number one, brands are very valuable, and number two, brands are valuable for some specific reasons. So this blogger and I started talking about some specific ways of measuring the value of the brand and some specific sources of the benefit of having a strong brand. Now, why are brands so valuable? What differences do brands make? Well, probably the simplest way of seeing it is looking at the price premium commanded by products with a well-known brand. In this picture, you have two different products. They're both aspirin. Chemically, if you look at the active ingredients and how they are made, physically speaking, chemically speaking, exactly same products. But on the left-hand side, you have the leading brand Bayer. And by virtue of having that brand is much more expensive. Actually, that bottle of Bayer has what, 200 pills. And 200 pills, the price is $12.79. On the right-hand side, there is a store brand that does not have a well-known brand name. And although each bottle contains 500 pills, it is cheaper. So if you look at the unit price, that is the price for the same quantity, then Bayer on the left-hand side is more than 3 times more expensive than the aspirin on the right-hand side. Physically speaking, exactly same. They are exactly the same chemical, same active ingredients, and so on. So that the difference really is reflective of the value of the brand. So one clear explanation for the value of the brand is that it helps the company command a premium price for various reasons. Number one, awareness. When people think about buying aspirin, for example, then they may automatically think about this well-known brand, and in their shopping list, they may just write buy Bayer aspirin and then go there, and without even thinking about other competing brands, they may buy Bayer. Also, attractiveness, that although physically, chemically, these are exactly the same products, people may perceive the quality of Bayer superior. Maybe the efficacy of Bayer aspirin superior to the no-name store brand. Or it could be also non-attribute perception. That is, well, if you look at the back of the bottle, the label and the active ingredients, everything reads the same, but also there are some other elements that may not be described in the bottle, and people may think, well, if you think about everything else that is not described, maybe Bayer has something better, something special, and so on. Perceived risk. People think maybe Bayer, the company, would do a better job of quality control and so on. So although these two products are supposed to be exactly the same, but it may be safer to go for a established name brand. And another interesting effect is placebo effect. That is, because of people's recognition of the brand and kind of comfort with the known brand name, actually it may make the body or the mind of the person also respond in a more positive way. That, who knows, although physically exactly the same, if people know that one product is Bayer, the other one is a unknown name, then the Bayer may work better. For these reasons, they may command a premium brand, premium price. And availability is another one that not only consumers, but also the retailers, distributors, they're more willing to carry Bayer because they know that it is in high demand and so on. Not only this awareness, attractiveness, availability, what I typically call in my class the 3 A's, lead to premium pricing, but also they often lead to a superior market share. So if you think about the smartphone market, Apple and Samsung are the 2 leading brands in the smartphone market. Why? Because of superior awareness, attractiveness, and availability, and they contribute significantly to the power of these brands. Not only the market share, but also post-purchase behavior when you think about the repeat purchase, brand loyalty, word of mouth, and the way people defend certain brand, the way people support certain brand. Having a strong brand has many advantages. So in a sense, it's almost like having a strong brand is like having a nice looking mask, smiling mask, so that in addition to what this person can do, also it adds some positive image, impression, positive perception that may lead to superior market share, that may lead to superior premium price. And if you understand the power of brand in that way, it sounds almost like brand management is just cosmetic makeup. Just give a positive impression, let people have a positive impression, show some pleasing positive side of your brand so that everybody will like it and you enjoy strong brand. Well, that used to be the way many people thought about brand. But now let's think about a little bit more recent and very interesting example. Now, 4 years ago, same month, September 2018, the world of brand management and the world of marketing just erupted with huge controversy because Nike celebrated the 30-year anniversary of probably the most successful advertising slogan that this company had used up to that point. That is Just Do It campaign. You might be familiar with that model. And to celebrate it, they did a special advertising campaign with a very controversial spokesperson who was an American football player, Colin Kaepernick, who became a very controversial figure because he refused to stand during the play of national anthem before a football game in protest to racial injustice and police brutality at that time. Now, Nike chose to use him as a spokesperson, and as you can see on this slide, his face and then his words believe in something, even if it means sacrificing everything. That was a very bold statement. Now, as soon as Nike announced that they were about to launch this advertising, the whole consumer world and social media just erupted with disputes. Some people loved it, some people hated it, some people were so angry about it that actually on Instagram, Facebook, some people showed videos or photos of burning their own Nike shoes, showing that they will not have anything to do with this brand anymore because they're so angry about this. And then, as I said again, there were an equal number of people who were praising the move of Nike. Now, one very well-known marketing consulting company and research company, Morning Consulting, did its research. And then shortly after this announcement, contacted me for a comment about this advertising campaign and also wanted to discuss the result of their research with me. And on the left-hand side, you see the result of the market research that they conducted right after the launch of this advertising campaign. Now, look at this arrow. This is when the advertising campaign was launched. Until then, Nike, and according to the Interbrand, in that year, 2018, it was 11th most valuable brand in the world. The value of the brand was roughly about $30 billion at that time. And considering that, it's not surprising that it was a highly favorable, popular brand. So if you look at the favorability of Nike, the red line, it is about 75%, probably among the American adult consumers. If you look at the purchase intention, which is indicated by the blue line, again, it was very high. About 2/3 of the American adult consumers said they would consider purchasing a Nike product. That is only until this advertising campaign. What happened? After that, both the preference, the red line, and the purchase intention, the blue line, just plunged. It came back just mildly towards the end of this graph, but really never really recovered. So if you look at this graph, it sounds like it was a disastrous failure. terrible mistake because consumers became much less favorable about this brand. It seems like Nike was ruining its brand. Was it? Well, when I was observing the stock market at that time, the stock market was giving me a very different signal. Now, this new arrow on the right-hand side shows what happened to the stock price of Nike around that time, early September. There was a small blip, right? Do you see a small decrease? But then the stock value just kept going up and up and up and up. No problem. And actually, the Nike gained the stock value so much during the month of September that the market capitalization of Nike increased by $6 billion during the month of September 2018, which means that, and so they called Colin Kaepernick the $6 billion man. Very interesting. Why was that? Well, some people said that's because of all that free publicity. People began talking about it, and there's no such a thing as bad publicity. Well, that's part of it, but according to somebody's estimation, the value of that free publicity, which kind of generating all the conversations about Nike, was only $163 million. And that doesn't even begin to explain how Nike really gained $6 billion during the month of September 2018, which is pretty much all gain in the value of the brand. Now, in order to understand that, you have to see this, that although the average kind of preference or average purchase intention went down, if you look at different segments of the consumers, then in certain segments of the consumers, the opinion about the Nike brand went up. In other segments, it went down. And this is very important. In other words, when Nike launched this advertising, some people boycotted it, but some people boycotted it. In other words, intensified their support of the brand. Now, these are some of the comments that I provided through Financial Times. The company's biggest risk is to become mainstream, the usual, everywhere, tamed. The part of the comment I provided for Morning Consult at that time was, from a brand manager's point of view, the decision to weigh in on a social issue comes down to how companies target consumers will react, and less so about how its overall favorability will be affected. In other words, brand management is not about putting on a smiling face and trying to please everybody. It is all about strengthening your relationship with your target customers. And Nike successfully did it, although it was controversial. And by doing that, it really demonstrated that brand management now has come out of that old understanding of just putting on a smiling mask, but it is becoming more bolder, transparent, and more passionate about expressing its own passions and convictions. Now, that leads us to some of the interesting contemporary trends in brand management. Now, brands are not just a cosmetic makeup or smiling mask. Brands are being seen as influential members of the society because, as I said earlier, brands are huge. Not only financially, they're huge, but also they draw so much attention, they have so much influence, they're in so many conversations that brands are existing as a very influential members of the society these days. And because of that, one clear trend that we see, especially in the example of Nike 2018 September advertising campaign, is what we call brand activism. Now, well-known brands are expected to take a stand on controversial issues, political issues, social issues. Nothing to do with whether they make good shoes or not, but about important social issues. They are increasingly demanded to express their values, convictions, and passions. And when they do it, they cannot just give a lip service. It has to be authentic, it has to be genuine, and it has to be consistent. These companies really have to live out those convictions and values. And Nike is just one example, but Starbucks, Ben & Jerry's ice cream, Patagonia, there are many, many examples. Even Disney in conflict with the state government of Florida in recent months really shows the demand for brand activism and for these brands, companies really stand up for what they really believe in. The second trend related with that is because of that now, the role of brand or branding or brand management is not just to make your product look good so that people will buy your product. That is more transactional view, but now the brand management has much stronger flavor of relationship management. Now, people beyond just feature and benefits of particular product has a very strong expectations on understanding the personality of each brand, and they begin to relate to brands in particular ways. So it's almost like brands are becoming personalities, persons, rather than asking what this brand can do for me in terms of product benefits. People are asking, who are you? What are you for? What do you believe? Are you my friend? Or are you a stranger? Are you like my sibling? Or are you like somebody, it's a casual acquaintance? There are so many different types of relationships that people feel or experience with different brands. And understanding that nature of the relationship and meeting the expectations of different types of relationships and developing relationship into a deeper and more mutually beneficial level, those have become a very important part of brand management these days. It's very interesting. Now, a lot of that also is really empowered by the growth of social media. Now, the consumers are not just passive audience anymore. The consumers are a lot more active. They participate in conversations, dialogues about brands. They put demands, they express their expectations on brands, and very often they also participate in the performance of the brands, about the communication about the brand, and so on. So, it's kind of strange way. Now, brand managers are losing control of their brands because brand managers cannot just rely on a strictly controlled messages that they can create to for their brand to create certain perception, but rather increasingly brand managers have to participate in an interactive dialogue with the public, with the consumers. Now, if these are the important contemporary trends in brand management, then you have to think about what the implications are for your personal branding. At the beginning, using some of the kind of dollar figures, I was trying to impress you on how significant, how valuable, how important brands are. Brands are huge. Not only in the world of marketing and in the world of brand management, but also in your personal professional career and in your life. How you brand yourself is huge. I'm not a personal branding expert, but probably if you're curious, you can easily find a lot of useful books, helpful books about personal branding, about some foundational kind of concepts, and also, especially in this age of social media, how you can execute, implement personal branding in a very effective way. So if you're interested, I would really encourage you to find more about it. But let's try to connect what we've been talking about in terms of the trends in brand management to their implications for personal branding. Number one, strategic focus. When you think about branding yourself, think about strategic focus. Don't try to be everything to everybody, because if you try to be everything to everybody in today's diverse, dynamic, and competitive market, a brand will become nothing to nobody. And because of that, you really need a very clear strategic focus. That is implication number one. Implication number two, authentic and consistent. Simply just including some nice words in your resume, credentials, kind of nice personal profile and bio in LinkedIn, saying the right words in job interviews and so on. Those are helpful. I don't minimize the importance of those things. But if you think those are all that are required for successful personal branding, you should think twice, because you really have to live your brand. Just saying what you think you can do or what you stand for is not enough, because it will show. It'll have to be authentic, it'll have to be genuine, it'll have to be consistent, so that your brand statement will be credible and trusted. And that is very important. So live your brand, be authentic and consistent. Number 3, just as now the world of brand management has moved from transactional to relational, when you think about your own personal branding, please don't think the skills and credentials will be sufficient to create a successful personal brand, because simply getting obtaining another master's degree in business, for example, is just additional credential, but that will not be your brand. Your brand will be not only what you can do, but also who you are in terms of your passions, your values, your convictions, how you relate with others, and so on. So always think about your personal branding, not only in terms of what you are capable of and what you can do, but also how you relate with the business world, how you relate with others, how you relate with the rest of the society. And that becomes a very important part of personal branding. If you do that successfully, then now your brand statement, what you stand for as a personal brand, will not be just an empty collection of empty words, but there will be some concrete story. It will be trustworthy. It will have the actual personality. So you have to focus on telling a story rather than just listing skills and credentials. Also, you have to listen to other people's stories, because as I said, now the branding is not so much transactional, but it's a lot more relational. It should be interactive. You should be willing to listen to others so that they will be also willing to listen to your story, and there will be a mutual understanding. So creating that relationship is really an important goal in personal branding. And through that, if you really genuinely listen to others, then you will continue to learn, you will continue to grow. So your brand statement, although I said as the first implication, strategic focus, your personal branding should not be just a finite message that you set as, oh, this is my brand, and then it remains fixed for the rest of your life. It has to be an evolving story. It will have to be a growing story. In other words, if you are pursuing a personal branding, then you will have to be a lifetime learner, so that your brand will continue to evolve and grow. And then that will all should be towards the goal of pursuing a lasting impact. I understand that many of you are thinking about pursuing another level of graduate education in business, perhaps. If you are, then think about that as an opportunity for really personal branding. Not just gaining knowledge, not just gaining another diploma or academic degree, but that will give you a very important opportunity to grow as a person, to clarify your strategic focus, what your passions, values, convictions are, not only what you can do, but also what kind of person you want to be professionally, also as a human being. In other words, personal branding is not just cosmetic makeup. It is quest for the soul. And if you kind of remember that as you think about your graduate education in business, I think it will be very helpful. So let me stop my presentation right there. And then if any of you have any questions or comments, I would be happy to interact with you at that level.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Professor Lee. So for the moment, I don't see any questions, but I do want to remind all participants that if they have any insight they would like to to just deepen their knowledge on any topic that has been mentioned during your presentation, they are free to write in the Q&A box. If they have any, for example, questions about how to brand themselves, why not? That can also be an interesting point to help our participants with. So while we are waiting for some questions, I would like to ask you, Professor, if you can offer us some more examples on controversial brand advertising campaigns that have sparked indignation in the public, but at the same time, maybe they have been successful precisely because of that. So I'm thinking, for example, the Always Like a Girl campaign.
Okay, so some examples for the.
And while we are waiting for the professor to answer the question, I would like to remind all participants that, of course, you can request your certificate of attendance by Docsity through a link that I will publish shortly in the chat. So stay tuned. Thank you so much, Professor.
Okay, great. Yeah, so there are a lot of examples of brand activism and brands participating in some kind of social issues or controversial issues and so on. I think Starbucks is another kind of good example. And when the U.S. There was the Donald Trump became the president of the U.S. and there was a kind of anti-immigrant policy going on. I think and there were some rising racial tensions. Starbucks really took a very strong stand on it and really tried to provide a safer environment and advocating the immigrants and so on. And that, again, was welcomed by some people. And then that was also being seen as a kind of negative move some other people too. So that would be the example. Recently, some of you might have heard about this company called Patagonia that basically gave all its wealth to the society. And so it is a company that really expresses its values and passions, convictions in a very strong way. And Patagonia is not shy about also taking a stand on some difficult issues. So especially because the society has become so much polarized in terms of their social views and political views, in the US particularly, but also all over the world, seems like that is the kind of world we are living in these days. I think the brands are becoming now more vocal about it, and also there are more issues that brands are really addressing to show their convictions about where they are standing on those issues.
Thank you so much, Professor. So I do have another question for you. I took some notes in the meantime. So of course, while talking about Patagonia, there perhaps a more successful example on what it means to take a stand on certain social issues. But I was wondering if, given that we are holding brands to, I would say, a higher standard than ever, if you can think about the riskiest things that a brand can do to compromise their credibility, for example, on their approach on sustainability.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think one example that comes to my mind is not very long ago, maybe 2-3 years ago, I think Pepsi also joined kind of this movement of activism, not in a very controversial or serious way, but I think one of their commercials really showed some scene of a kind of protest or demonstration, maybe kind of demanding kind of racial harmony and racial peace and so on. And then in the commercial, I think one person gave Pepsi to, I forgot whether it was a protester or maybe the riot police there. And that really backfired because the number one, it seems to kind of promote actually the product even in the moment of talking about something that is very serious and affecting so many lives. And also, it was more of kind of putting on a smiling mask rather than uh, a, a signal that is really followed by a consistent action and conviction. So many companies saw that maybe brand activism is the trend and maybe we should do it. So there were a lot of kind of half-hearted attempts at showing their convictions and passions on some controversial social issues. And if they're not being seen as authentic by the public, then you're running the risk of actually being seen more like a hypocritical rather than actually being passionate about certain topics. So you'll have to be very careful about this. And very often, companies may make some mistakes, but I think consistency over a long period of time is really important rather than just the one-shot campaign to trying to change the company's or the product's image.
Yes, Pepsi's campaign was surely perceived as tone deaf. I think we can all agree on that. Thank you so much, Professor. So in the meantime, I would like to remind all participants that if they have any questions on brand management, on personal branding, of course, we are more than happy to answer them. And for those of you who want to ask for your certificate of attendance by Docsity, of course, you can click the link in the chat. And Professor, I have another question for you. So I was wondering, speaking of brands that were born as an e-commerce, for example, do you think there are any differences in branding trends, in brand management trends between these companies and those who were born offline, so to speak?
So you're talking about the e-commerce brands?
Yes.
Okay. So yes, there are some important differences because e-commerce, electronic marketplace, social media, they brought a lot of kind of interesting things. I think at one level, what is really interesting about e-commerce is now companies have this unprecedented amount of information, data about customers, right? The customers are just leaving their fingerprints, footprints all over the area. And because of that, now the micro-targeting and retargeting, that is, rather than talking to the mass of kind of audience, now the companies have the capability of really customizing their message and customizing their marketing strategies for each individual consumers. And that is very important part. Now, what is interesting is, on the one hand, that capability exists, but on the other hand, still the brand has to be the same person to everybody. So you cannot really pretend to be a different person or show different personality to different people. So how you can maintain and create a strong and consistent brand for the whole society, because even if you're talking about two different countries, for example, now there is a lot more communication and conversations going internationally that you cannot have just a one brand image in one country and then creates a totally different personality in different country. So having a more global brand personality and then implementing the individual relationship at a individual consumer level, I think that is the challenge, but also a great potential for the e-commerce brand management field.
Thank you so much, Professor. So as a last question, I would like to ask you if there are any brands that you think are not big at this very moment, but that have the potential or will in the close future become big, so to speak, on the brand management scene?
Okay, well, that's a really interesting question, because if you think about the rankings of the best global brands that I showed you earlier, then seems like number one is Apple, and then Amazon, Microsoft, just a big technology brands, right? So it seems like in order for brands to be effective, then you have to be big, you have to be just recognized by everybody. But I think you're raising a very interesting question, because as we saw in the example of Nike, the big brands always, their challenge is whether it is too big so that it becomes just mainstream and for everybody and everywhere. Because once your brand become mainstream and just everywhere and common, then it really loses the unique personality and the relationship power with consumers. So I really can't just point to one particular brand, but I think what will be really interesting is whenever there is this kind of mainstream or the establishment, it is very important for brand managers or the people who are interested in brands to look at the counterculture, because that is always a very powerful wave or stream that the next growth of brand, growth opportunity for a new brand exists. That is what is called the cultural branding. And if a brand can kind of capture the power of the new counterculture movement and add a little bit more energy and life into it, then the brand can really grow with that new trend. And I think that is another new, I guess, kind of driving force of a brand management world empowered by the social media that now brand managers will really have to pay attention to these days.
Thank you so much, Professor. So I do have one final question. You mentioned Apple, and I find them to be an interesting example because they managed to brand themselves as a premium provider of products. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, they are very mainstream as well. So how do you think they manage to balance both elements, so to speak, in their brands?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I mean, it is mainstream, but if you ask the Apple people, they will kind of refuse to agree with it. Although, I mean, I understand where you're coming from, and I think it's fair to say it's mainstream. So Apple is trying very hard not to be seen as mainstream. Before their introduction of their smartphone, iPhone, which came into the market in 2007, Apple always ran this kind of a competitive advertising campaign against the PC or the Windows world to show that that is the mainstream and Apple is fresh, Apple has the real personality, and Apple is a slight underdog, but actually is superior. And still, Apple is trying very hard to maintain that personality. And that may be why they also insist on having their own operating system so that it is being seen as kind of unique and differentiated from the rest of the world. And that is very important. Another important thing that I'd like to point out about Apple is that, again, just like the discussion about the BMW and Rolls-Royce and Volkswagen, Apple basically it sees is the core of its business as brand management. Of course, the innovation and design is a huge part of its brand management. But if you think about how many of Apple products are being manufactured and produced by Apple, very little, almost none, because production and manufacturing can be done by someone else. But the essence of their business is really the brand, and that is probably the most valuable asset for the company. So I think the Apple is trying very hard, and I think it has been largely successful. But because it is so large and so mainstream, I think it is a big challenge. The success of a brand is its own challenge. And remaining as really a personal, something relatable, despite its huge scale success, is the continuous challenge for Apple.
Thank you so much, Professor. I want to thank you especially for your precious and very interesting presentation. I'm sure that all participants appreciated your time here. So for all those that remain connected until now, I want to remind you that you will get an email. So you will be able to actually review the content of this masterclass, and you will also get all the information to get in touch with Syracuse. So if you are interested in their master programs or MBA, please check out your email and we'll be in touch. Thank you, Lisa, for being here with us. Absolutely. It was a pleasure to moderate this masterclass. Professor Lee, once again, thank you so much for your time, and I hope to see everyone to the next event in partnership with Syracuse. Thank you so much.
Okay, my pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.